buddy. Do you read me?
Loud and clear, kid. What's up?
Well, I finished my circle. I don't pick up any life readings.
There isn't enough life on this ice cube to fill a space cruiser. Sensors are placed. I'm going back.
Right, I'll see you shortly. There's a meteorite that hit the ground near here. I want to check it out. It won't take long. Steady. Hey, steady, girl. Hey, what's the matter? You smell something?
Welcome to another episode of Cinema Sleuths. I'm Luke Deckard.
And I'm Matthew Booth.
And this is part 2 of Star Wars, a trilogy of retcons, where, if you don't know, we are taking a look at the various retcons around the original theatrical release of Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. We're looking at ditch sequels to the big changes between the novelizations and the final films. And I think it's safe to say that retcons are just a part of the Star Wars DNA. But what we want to know is, do they all work? So, Matt, why don't you tell the listeners what we're investigating tonight?
Well, for part 2 of this trilogy of retcons, we are investigating, of course, The Empire Strikes Back, starring Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher, written by Leigh, Brackett, and Lawrence Kasdan, from a story by George Lucas, and directed by Irvin Kershner. And the IMDb logline for The Empire Strikes Back is: after the Empire overpowers the Rebel Alliance, Luke Skywalker begins training with Jedi Master Yoda, while Darth Vader and bounty hunter Boba Fett pursue his friends across the galaxy. The Empire Strikes Back.
Yes, I'm excited to dive into this one, but
Me too.
we have brought on a guest cinematic sleuth, one who, if you listen to us on Mean Streets, you will have heard his voice. But we have Sergio Angelini, the host of Tipping My Fedora. Welcome, Sergio. Glad to have you with us.
Welcome, Sergio.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yes. So, Sergio, last week, we sort of kicked off by talking about our relationship with Star Wars, its impact on us as youngins and stuff like that. So tell us a little bit about your general relationship with Star Wars. Was this something you were a big fan of, casual fan of, or didn't give a shit about?
I was a fan in the sense that I'm one of those people who got very caught up in its arrival in the UK at the time. It happened to be a brief window when I was living here rather than Rome in Italy. And you had this sense that it was coming because it was released in May 77 in America, but it didn't get to the UK here for many, many, many months after that. But in the meantime, it was generating all this excitement and you knew it was coming. Mm-hmm. And I think deep down, it was one of the, we only moved to the UK. So my dad worked for the airline business, and we only got here in the summer of 77. So it was kind of already starting to trickle through that there was this extraordinary thing. In a way, it was one of the earliest things for me as an 8-year-old as going into 9-year-old, by being a 9-year-old, was getting excited by something that it was sort of, I was going to explore it and discover it for myself. And so it was a big deal. I definitely was one of those people who, I got the soundtrack. I got some of the toys. I love the lightsabers. I had a lightsaber. I had one of those ones where it was really a torch with a translucent piece of plastic on top of it.
Yes.
So they did not last long.
No.
So it was that classic thing. I totally bought into it. I thought it was fantastic.
Last week we talked about, did we see these films in the cinema? Obviously, I did not. Well, I was obviously not, but I was not able to do so because I was not alive yet. Makes it a little bit difficult.
Oh.
And I don't have a time machine. But I did see Star Wars on its re-release in 1977 with all of George Lucas's
1997.
1997. Yeah, all of the CGI insert stuff. I don't think I saw the re-release of Empire Strikes Back. I think Star Wars is the only one of the original trilogy that I've seen in the cinema. But I'm assuming you guys saw Empire Strikes Back in the cinema.
I definitely saw it in the cinema, yeah. I remember vividly playing with a lad who lived 2 doors down, and he had already seen The Empire Strikes Back before me, and he was, as 6, 7, 8-year-old lads are prone to do, he was desperate to play with the toys and act out the film, and I was equally desperate that we shouldn't, because I didn't know, and I didn't want any surprises or spoilers being ruined for me.
I saw them all at the cinema, and I have very, very strong memories of everything I liked and some of the things that drove me a bit mad about Empire Strikes Back.
Right. So Star Wars hits 1977. 1980, Empire Strikes Back comes out. Between that time, we're already getting more retcons to this franchise. We briefly touched upon the original sequel novel, but we're going to give it a little bit more time. So Splinter of the Mind's Eye came out in 78, really quickly. Written by Alan Dean Foster, who was the ghostwriter for Star Wars, the novelization. Lucas, as you know, we talked about, wasn't sure if Star Wars was going to be a hit. Him and Lucas were off developing Indiana Jones when Star Wars premiered. And his whole thought was, well, if Star Wars isn't a success, I'll just do this little tiny film, called Splinter of the Mind's Eye. So this was planned to be the original sequel. But because the film blew up, he threw that out the window and started developing a much more big budgeted sequel. I think it's worth just hinting at a little bit more about kind of what was in Splinter of the Mind's Eye. There's interesting bits in here. So, Luke and Leia are on a mission. There is a romance going on. Luke is batting eyes at her. There is no hint in this whatsoever of what things that might come later on down the line that might be revealed in Return to the Jedi. But there are other similarities. Things like they crash land on a swampy planet, very much like Dagobah. They meet an old woman who kind of helps them along the way, bit like Yoda. There is a lightsaber battle between Luke and Vader, but interestingly enough, there's a moment in the book where Leia fights Vader with Luke's lightsaber as well, which I'm like, that sounds so badass. And the fact that was in this novel and then never pulled into the actual original trilogy is kind of a bummer. And then, when there's an opportunity to do something with that further on, 30 some odd years down the line, they still fuck it up. Anyway, we're not talking about those. But yeah, but there's a bit in the book where Luke and Vader are fighting, and Luke slices off Vader's arm. Empire Strikes Back, Luke gets his hand chopped off by Vader. And then, so there's all these little bits. It's interesting because you're kind of seeing the ingredients of what will become Empire Strikes Back. There's a lot of little bits that are clearly being taken from this, to the point where I'm kind of like, should Alan Dean Foster maybe have a little bit of a credit on Empire Strikes Back? Maybe. I don't know. There's just a lot of little bits in here that I'm kind of like, I guess you've maybe tweaked them enough. I don't know. But yeah, this would have been the sequel. But like I said, this one was cut. But I really like the sound of this story, and there's a part of me kind of wishes it maybe could have been the thing. But again, this whole thing is completely wiped out. So this is probably one of the biggest retcons that happens post Star Wars, and that is an entire second story is completely is produced, put out there, and then almost instantly abandoned. Between Star Wars and Splinter and Empire, he makes another big change, one that I find absolutely irritating, and that is, before Empire comes out, Star Wars is re-released, but it's no longer called Star Wars. It's called Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. And thus begins a complicated relationship with the Star Wars franchise. We're now suddenly on episode 4. What the hell was episode 1, 2, and 3?
I don't remember having any feelings whatsoever about that, but I will have been too young to have that sort of appreciation or understanding, I think, because I'll have been five or six. But I do remember later on, before the prequels were a thing, before they ever came along, I do remember thinking about it, as a teenage, and I always just assumed that it was like just an homage to those old serials, like we talked last week about. Lucas wanted to do Flash Gordon, couldn't get the rights, and they always, when they were at their most exciting, they were always sort of halfway through. So the first couple of episodes, I always think of those things like Flash Gordon and the Batman serials, Zorro, and all those. When it's being set up, they're the least interesting for me. Well, they were at that time anyway. And I just always assumed that it was, plucked out of thin air. It's episode 4 because that's sort of the story's on its way. And the important point really is that this is a 1930s serial for today.
I think at the time the new title, A New Hope, slightly puzzled me just because it didn't seem like a particularly interesting movie title per se.
No.
On the other hand, I was already aware of Flash Gordon. I was already aware of King of the Rocket Men, which is my personal favorite.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah.
I've got those on Blu-ray now, and personal favorite of the Republic serials, and that sort of it fed into that very quickly, and I got that. So I think deep down, this idea that what it did was, with the stroke of a pen, it suddenly expanded and created a universe. What it does is it sets up the idea of sequels. I want to know there's more, and because I want more. So actually, I think from that point of view, I was okay with it. I really was. So there you go.
Mistress Leia, R2 says he's been quite unable to pick up any signals, although he does admit that his own range is far too weak to abandon all hope.
Your Highness, there's nothing more we can do tonight. The shield doors must be closed.
So, okay, let's go behind the scenes then. Lucas doesn't come back to direct. He didn't really want to direct it. He wanted to do more big picture stuff. He wanted to be involved with on the editing side and do more of the producing of it. So he calls up Irvin. He's like, "Hey man, let's meet up. Let's go out for lunch." And at this lunch, he's like
George Lucas. It's uncanny, Luke.
I know, right?
Your George Lucas impersonation is amazing.
I know.
Yeah.
He's like, "Hey man, let's meet up for lunch." They go out for lunch, and he's like, "I want you to direct the next Star Wars." And Irvin's like, "The fuck?" Now, I think this is probably one of the first best decisions that Lucas made with the entire Star Wars franchise. Discuss.
I've almost nothing to add to that because I think it's absolutely right. I think it was a great decision. I think Kershner was good. Made a good decision to take it on and do with it what he did. I think it's a far. I don't want to say a far superior film, but in terms of movie making, I think it is. I think it's better, but it's better scripts and better direction. Which sort of says it all.
Well, one of the things he is kind of responsible for is Kershner likes to do a lot of improv on set. He doesn't like it. Doesn't have to be strictly what's on the paper. And while they were doing the Yoda stuff, he was sort of the one who was like, I think we can make this a little bit more fun. So a lot of the playful Yoda goofiness at the beginning, that's now just iconic and great, is down to him being like, let's play with this a little bit more. Let's flesh this out a little bit more. And I think that's one of the big differences between Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back is there is a deeper exploration of all of the characters that I'm not sure Lucas would have accomplished. Sergio, you're skeptical.
No, I don't mean it that way, because I think what's interesting about Kershner is that in relation to Lucas, he's a bit like asking Ben Kenobi to come and direct the movie. he was a tutor of his at UCLA, and he was someone who had a perfectly good directing career, making films with people like Sean Connery, Elliot Gould, Donald Sutherland, and who had just made a really stylish movie called The Eyes of Laura Mars with Faye Dunaway from a script by John Carpenter. And that was a film that was particularly noted for what a great looking movie it was. Now, of course, it's based in the fashion photography business, so therefore there was a reason for that. But he was a guy who tended to make very smooth looking, very kind of polished films. I think Lucas, you may be slightly underselling Lucas. I think if you look at his, he'd only directed 2 feature films before that. And I think the one he'd had the huge hit with was American Graffiti. Now, American Graffiti is okay. It's the coming of age movie that perhaps all filmmakers have in them. But the point is that it's completely character based. It's, although there's all the fun about the cars, but, it's about interaction, and it takes a very subtle approach to character development and reaching, shall we say, dramatic peaks, but nonetheless does that. All under the shadow of the Vietnam War. So there's a lot going on in there. And I think one of the things that he doesn't always get credit for is I think that there's sometimes a gigantic amount of subtext. I mean, I think when you get to Phantom Menace, what's odd is that you've got a film that's nearly all subtext. And everybody is not enjoying the text very much. And yet the subtext is actually really, really interesting. Yes. Here, I think that when we get into Empire Strikes Back, Lucas had clearly done an enormous amount of sort of world building in preparation for what became Star Wars. And I think this idea that there are multiple stories and it might be 9, it might be 6, whatever, obviously comes from the fact that he'd had all these different ideas that were partly based on character beats and what have you. And, and as you guys discussed on the previous podcast. But it seems to me that what works here is getting an older person to make the film, someone who has is much more experienced and who has a different worldview. At the same time, Lucas is the boss, so Kershner does not, as it were, have final cut, and he knows that going in. But at the same time, he comes from a culture, particularly within people like Lucas, where the director is very important. So he's going to be a strong collaborator there. And I will get to it, but I suspect particularly when it comes to Han Solo as a character, as played by Harrison Ford, I think Kershner becomes very important there as well. But it's interesting because, of course, Lucas, and again, we're going to get to that, but Lucas is doing that in terms of the big creatives he's approaching are all from a previous generation. Because, of course, the other screenwriter he wants to work with is Leigh Brackett. And so he's making a movie directed by Irvin Kershner, who's been directing stuff since the 50s, and it was written by, in theory, Leigh Brackett, who's been writing movies since the 40s. Now, that's interesting. That's absolutely the generation that absolutely precedes him. He would barely, he wasn't necessarily born when Leigh Brackett started writing films. So it's very intriguing. Yeah. And I think that's very telling about where his mind is at. And I think if you have to sort of understand what's happening with Empire Strikes Back and what's not happening, it's partly because of that, I think. And I find that very, very interesting.
I think it's a case of what we talked last week about, he has the ideas and he can take them so far, but occasionally somebody has to come in and either rein him in or polish them a little bit. And I think I'm right in saying he didn't enjoy the whole experience of directing Star Wars, which is why part of the reason I suppose he doesn't come back for this. But he knows who to go to. The Empire Strikes Back wouldn't be what it is if he'd not taken that step back, I don't think.
Well, I think you've sort of teed up the next bit, and that is the writing aspect of it. And he was like, "I'm not fucking writing this shit. I'm not doing it." But he didn't want the hassle of it. He just is the long and short of it. He didn't want to have to do the rewrites and anything like that. So he approached Leigh Brackett, which there's a story that I read that he called her up and was selling her on the concept, and she was basically like, Oh, I mean, I'm assuming you're calling me because I've done all these movies and The Big Sleep and all that. Because she's one of the writers on the Bogart Big Sleep, and he was like, "Oh no, I didn't even realize that. It's all these old sci-fi books that you've that you've done. That's why I'm calling you."
So she had, I don't know if you've read any of her stuff, but she's a terrific writer, and in a way, that's if you really did read her stuff and was watching it, she wrote swashbuckling, romantic science fiction adventures, mostly set on Mars. A Mars that has a certain debt to Edgar Rice Burroughs. The majority of her writing outside of film credits is in science fiction. She also wrote some crime fiction, but primarily it's science fiction, and it's good stuff. And it, I think from that point of view, Lucas is right.
Yes,
from that point of view, she's a really good choice. But sure.
Lucas wasn't happy with her script fully. But so it's interesting to look at. So they apparently had this big sit down meet where they talked about the film. They talked about sort of the overall story points and kind of what they wanted, what he wanted included. There was also this notion that Luke did have a twin sister. So this was something that was being brought up at this point in the game. So not during Splinter of the Mind's Eye, but in the process of writing Empire Strikes Back, there is this concept of a twin sister somewhere out there. You can also look at J.W. Rinsler's The Making of Star Wars: Empire Strikes Back for lots of cool information about the writing of this. What was in Brackett's version of the story is that there was a stronger love triangle between Luke, Han, and Leia, which we sort of points out at the end of the last episode. They are literally stood in a triangle. That you have a physical love triangle as your symbolic conclusion to that movie. There is apparently her script has a lot more sort of traditional romances. I think Leia is a bit more of a damsel in distress, from what I understand. Yoda's name eventually gets changed to Minch. He teaches Luke how to summon Obi-Wan Kenobi, summon the Force ghost of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and brings Luke's father with him. Again, even at this point in the story, Vader is clearly not Luke's dad, and Leia is also not Luke's sister. There is another, that is named in this particular script. But in the course of this film, like, Luke is knighted as a Jedi. But his final test is he does have to go and defeat Vader. So there's a lot of elements here that are clearly still in Empire Strikes Back. That's why Leigh gets a massive credit, because there you go. But like I said, Lucas wasn't really happy with everything that was on the page. So he brought in Lawrence Kasdan, who basically came and kind of reshaped the story, tweaked the dialogue, spiced it up a little bit, made it a little more playful, added a little bit more comedy. And I think this is one of those things where it's like these two were a really great mesh of writers. I think Brackett really put down some really cool stuff, and then I think Kasdan was able to then take it up another notch. And between those two, with George's inputs, because like we said last week, everything about Star Wars, the things that really made it cook were the fact that he was working collaboration, and it was just this kind of constant collaborative effort between all these different creatives, making this thing the best it can be. And I think that does really shine with Empire Strikes Back a little bit more than Star Wars, with the people that he's getting to kind of punch this thing up, because he's not writing the whole thing. He's like, here's my story idea. Here's these two really great writers. Go make this amazing. And that's exactly what they did. What's your take on Kasdan's involvement?
He brings a lot to it. I mean, but what's interesting, again, is just that he's someone who, as a writer, was someone who had a great interest in the traditional, well-made Hollywood screenplay. He got noticed because he'd written the first version of what was The Bodyguard. Mm-hmm. And originally it was going to be Steve McQueen. And that was 1975. Mm-hmm. So he's a young guy. And he then writes a kind of screwball comedy So again, he's sort of doing a film. He's writing something that would sort of fit within. If it could have been Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn from the 40s, and it's called Continental Divide, and that gets him a lot of notice. Oddly enough, again, both films take forever to get made, but they're all written in the 70s, and so he's brought in. He's writing Raiders of the Lost Ark because Spielberg liked Continental Divide. And so he's got him doing work on Raiders of the Lost Ark. And again, a very old-fashioned kind of serial-inspired, very episodic sort of narrative with a strong romantic emphasis in terms of the storytelling and very recognizable kind of mold. And yet at the same time, one that brings a kind of new tone, a slightly younger, fresher outlook, but one that isn't anchored in kind of 70s necessarily. There's a slightly, there's a real love of movie lore and movie style there. So I think what he clearly does a huge amount of writing. I mean, my understanding is that, Brackett got given quite a seriously detailed brief. Mm-hmm. And so the script that she hands in very shortly before she passes away, so just that first draft has most of the major story beats, including the asteroid field and all this kind of stuff, and all that kind of stuff. But we don't actually know how much of that came directly from Lucas. I suspect a lot of it, because a lot of them are kind of big, obvious set pieces. And one imagines that that's how Lucas is thinking. Because if you think about it, they're all discrete episodes that would have absolutely fitted in with a kind of serialized narrative. You would have had 15 minutes dealing with the city in the sky. You would have had 15 minutes dealing with Dagobah. You would have 15 minutes dealing with, so on and so forth. So you can see how that would have worked. And what he's doing is he's bringing in an ability to really synthesize things and to not get bogged down in the kind of thematic element, but instead dramatize it. What's here is that he works with Brackett because he's interested in her background and what she has to bring. And it's clear in his mind that he wants to go for that slightly more romantic space opera feel. And that isn't really what she gives him, because she does, in fact, give him something that I think feels too old-fashioned to him. Yes. So we get a younger writer like Lawrence Kasdan, who, of course, then comes up with, in his initial scripts that fundamentally all tend to get made eventually, like Body Heat, which is a directorial debut, of course, is very much an updated, beautifully, wonderfully updated 1940s film noir. So, he's following that with all his films, an update of a screwball, an update of the kind of hard-boiled thriller. It's really a version of something like Narrow Margin or something, which I know you love the remake, Matt. Here, I think that's what he really brings, this ability. He's very strong on dialogue, but he can actually make the story beats really translate in a fun way, but also, but he's good on reversals, which are very important, because things don't always go the way you're seemingly thinking it's going to go.
Feeling all right, sir?
Just like new, Dak. How about you?
Right now, I feel like I can take on the whole empire myself.
I know what you mean.
The novel came out in April of 1980, and there are some interesting differences. This is where the retcons continue. So in this, Yoda is blue. He's a little blue Smurf. Lobot has a personality and actually talks. There is no such thing as a Boba Fett. Boba Fett is oh shit, everyone really likes this Boba Fett from the Star Wars holiday special. Maybe we should shove him into Empire Strikes Back.
The only thing that people like from the holidays.
I saw that when it was first broadcast. I'm one of those people. Yeah, feel sorry for me.
The Han and Leia, the famous Han and Leia exchange, is slightly tweaked. There is no, there's no, I know. She says, I love you. And he says, just remember that, because I'll be back. Like he's the fucking Terminator. An interesting change from the novel to the film is when Luke is dangling from the bottom of Cloud City, he actually falls. The Millennium Falcon they see him fall, and they do this like dive maneuver to catch up to him and then catch him while he's falling. And I'm like, that's really awesome. I wish he would have kept that. What these early scripts were sort of looking like, these introductions of a sister, these introductions of finally meeting the ghost of Anakin. So all of that being scrapped, to Splinter the Mind's Eye being scrapped. But then these, what is starting to kind of, be distilled in the novelization that then, was, gonna, people are going to be able to see the film in a few months' time. Even differences between those two things, which is very similar to what was happening with Star Wars and Empire. And what I find fascinating is this came out in April, sold 3 million copies. So Star Wars sold 3.5 million. Apparently, this sold 3 million copies. What shocks me is, like, how did the world not know that Vader was Luke's father before the film even came out? Like, I know there was no internet, but if 3 million people bought this book, that's that's quite impressive that people were not chatting about that all over the place.
It is strange, isn't it, to think? I think we said something similar about Star Wars and the novelization of Star Wars, that you would go to this film, if you'd read this novelization, you'd go wondering, what's in it for me, because I've read it all, and what's different. And the primary reason for going, perhaps, would be to see how, if at all, it has changed. It must be odd not to have that shock value of that reveal that you have in the cinema. Maybe it must be a different experience when you read it on the page, but to sit in the cinema in the darkened auditorium and know what's coming, I can't fathom that. Something in my brain won't let me deal with that at all.
I tell you one thing, I always assumed that a lot of those copies were bought but not read. I don't mean that or rather not read until after they'd been to see the movie.
Oh,
I think it was that way you grabbed it, you got a certain bit of it. They might have read a bit of it to get a sense of what it was going to be about, and now you have it. It's the part of the film you can own, because although video sort of exists, nobody really has it. Nobody's really buying Betamax yet. We're just not there yet. I've got to share this anecdote and embarrass my brother, who's going to be listening to this. When I went to see this at the cinema, this was in a place called Horsham in West Sussex, because where our grandparents lived. And my brother and I went over to see them. And it was actually one of the few times where, I think one of the first times where he and I went to cinema on our own, which I think meant that our grandparents weren't interested in seeing the next Star Wars film. So we were going on our own, and it's 1980, they're in the UK, and we go to Boots first. And we'd gone there, and I'm pretty sure I was looking at some of the film soundtrack re-recordings by Charles Gerhard that were being released by CBS at the time, including the classic film scores of Miklos Rozsa, Eric Wolfgang Korngold, Bernard Herrmann. And while I was looking at those, my brother was looking at the comics. And we finished up. My brother's at this point 9.5. And we go to the cinema, we got the tickets, we're queuing up, we're just about to go into the auditorium. And my brother tugs at my shoulder and he says, "Yeah, what?" I says, "Do you think it's really true that Darth Vader is Luke's dad?" And what he had, I mean, obviously, I said, "No, of course not." But of course, I was ready to kill him, because what had actually happened is that he had read the Marvel Comics adaptation in Boots.
Oh no!
And my brother's always been like this. He went straight to the end, man. You know. And so, and I just couldn't believe it. So he spoiled it literally, probably 5 minutes before the film was due to start. So there you go. So thanks, Marco. But I'm never going to forget that memory.
That is painful.
That's a killer.
In total innocence, because what was sweet was, at that point in his life, if I told him it wasn't true, I was right.
He believed,
I was his older brother. He got out of that fairly soon, admittedly, unfortunately. Now he does what he likes. He's much brighter than I am. So that's fair. But I couldn't bloody believe it. I really couldn't.
I'd be furious. On that note, I guess let's pivot and talk about the story for Empire Strikes Back.
That's it. The rebels are there.
My lord, there are so many uncharted settlements. It could be smugglers, it could be...
That is the system. And I'm sure Skywalker is with them. Set your course for the Hoth system. General Veers, prepare your men. Admiral.
Something that I sort of noticed that I was on this particular run, more than any other time in the past, was how claustrophobic the film is. It does a couple of things. We were talking about, about the fact that it's episode 5 now. The universe is expanding. The story is expanding. There's definitely a sense of the Star Wars universe expanding with this film, but at the same time, the story is very claustrophobic, in my opinion. Hoth is the base is tight and dense. These tunnels are small, narrow tunnels. All the ships that they're in, there's like no room. Like people are like smushed into the ships in the way that they aren't smushed into the X-Wings. All the Falcon scenes are really tight. People are in really small sections of the Falcon. The Falcon doesn't seem as big as it did in Star Wars. It's still the same size. It doesn't seem like it's smaller, but we are pushed in to corners of the Falcon, which I found very interesting. Dagobah is this dense forest. Yoda's house is tiny. We're going into the caves. We're going to the underbelly of this Cloud City. It's a bigger world, but I just felt this sense of claustrophobia, but in a good way. Like it's part of the story, and you feel it's like whether I don't know how intentional this is or not, if they were, but it's like this sort of, it opens with Hoth. It's out in the open, big and bright. And then Luke's storyline goes from this big open space to this this tight space where he's fighting Vader in the end. Whether that was intentional per se, I don't know, or happy coincidence, maybe. But I really liked that component of the story.
Well, I like the darker side to this. Star Wars is a bit of a romp. There's a lot of humor in it, and it's a real good, feel good adventure film. This has got issues. This has got much more depth, much more psychological excitement. But I agree. I also think it's claustrophobic. Rewatching it, I think it's claustrophobic, and I'd forgotten how many close-ups there are. This is a film of close-ups of people's faces.
Yeah.
And that adds to that sense of, the outside world is growing because we're learning of other places that isn't really just Tatooine and the Death Star.
Yeah.
Which essentially is what Star Wars is. There's lots of different places in this that are referenced, and talked about. And the whole sense of the outside world expanding whilst the characters' lives and their events are contracting is great. I think it really works. So I'd agree with that. And I just like the darker tone of all this, and the more sort of Freudian side of it all, with Luke lopping off Vader's head and it being his own face inside and all that business. But still peppered with humor. There's still, Han Solo is still a comic figure in some way.
Yeah.
Yoda is comic at the start until the seriousness of it all starts to take over, and he starts to, you learn that almost the comic side of Yoda has been to test Luke, and see what Luke's patience is like and whether he's ready and all that business. But everything does feel scaled down somehow. The lifting of the X-Wing out of the swamp is sort of this film's equivalent to me of that scene that Sergio was talking about and we talked about last week, of that massive spacecraft filling the screen. This is sort of the closest you get to a repeat of that. I think I'm in your camp on this, Luke. I think character-wise it's much more intense and compact. But the greatness of the film is that it is able to do that whilst convincing me that there is a bigger world out there. I think it's a very good representation of, one versus the other.
I think you're very right to sort of say, the thing about Star Wars is it's kind of two main environments fundamentally. It's the Death Star, and then you're on Tatooine. That's kind of it. And here, because instead you're in several other places as well, what it tends to do is you have less time to spend on them, actually. And what you don't have, therefore, is lots of time to go and explore the desert planet. So you don't do that. So although you've got a nice planet, you've done the opposite. The fact is that story requirements require that you spend time with the characters. And you're absolutely right. I think it's a strategic decision. Some of that is probably also financial. But I think, you kind of, it's a bit like establishing shots and then you go indoors. And that is whether you're inside a tauntaun, or whether you're inside a cave, or whether you're inside the belly of a beast, which is inside a field of rocks, and you're inside of you're kind of, it's almost like a Russian doll, and you're nested within. Now, that's partly just a sort of storytelling approach, but in actual fact, I think that there is something interesting going on there, as you say, because the emphasis is on a slightly darker, more introspective sense of character. So the way you're developing it is to a certain extent by looking at deeper feelings. So in terms of Han and Leia, it's about a romance, which, as a kid, in Princess Bride mode, I was going, is this going to be a kissing movie? So I'm not sure how I felt about that. But, now that I'm older, I'm all for it. So that's okay. I think that equally, Luke's journey, of course, becomes very, very interior. So that trip to Dagobah is specifically designed as this kind of Freudian nightmare, because you've got that great line of Yoda's, which is, when you go in there into the cave, you just take in, it's what you bring with you is all you'll find in there, which is great stuff. And, I don't think what I made of that as a kid, but I think that it's something primal. And so therefore, I think that the fact that you have, you establish these big environments, but you immediately go inside them. In fact, one of the interesting things about the re-edit or the new edition of that is that they add windows to Lando Calrissian's City in the Sky, so that you can see the view outside, because otherwise it's just white walls all the time. And again, psychologically, thematically, it totally works. And like you were saying, that business of not making as big a deal about when he's hanging off the bottom end of this floating city, and that they don't swoop and collect him, is because you're not using the space in that kind of dynamic way. You've gone from one tiny part of a gigantic structure to another smaller part of a larger structure, and you don't even see it happen, which, okay, is a suspense mechanism. It also slightly avoids perhaps what might have been suspension disbelief type issues, pardon the pun, in terms of suspension. But it seems to me that, that's very deliberate, but it's also about being economical, because it's a longer film. It ends up costing Lucas personally 3 times, slightly more than 3 times what the first one had cost, and that had cost Fox. And here it's him and the Bank of America who are going to fight over the budget. And so it's very intriguing. So I think you're spot on about that, but I think it suits the film. But again, it's this thing about, because it's the jam in the sandwich. It is that analogy. Because when we get to the third one, and I hate those Ewoks so much, but at least you get to spend an awful lot of time in the forest, and you get to go all around that damn forest, and and so on and so forth, and so you get better to enjoy that, for better or worse. But it's a real environment, and you get a sense of scale again, a sense of space. Here you get all kinds of wonderful new things, but you're immediately going from large to small. And one of the stylistically interesting things about it, and this is absolutely Kershner, I think, it's the use of point of view shots, something Lucas has no interest in whatsoever. But it's like when he lands on Dagobah, and when it crashes, you see it from inside the cockpit. It's exactly the same when he crashes the X-wing or whatever it is, when they're fighting. Yeah, it's that same shot. And equally, although you have, and often they're achieved through, sometimes convincing, some not convincing, but always beautiful matte paintings. When they're inside the Rebel base on Hoth, you've established that as very large space. But if you compare that with the equivalent in, say, Last Jedi, where you get a much better sense of scale and hugeness, and that's partly what Rian Johnson was channeling, and he was doing that in a kind of film spectacle way. The thing about Empire Strikes Back is it isn't about film spectacle, not really. And I think that when we get there, it's also about how we've got an inverse narrative structure, particularly, which is not just the opposite of what Star Wars did as a first film, but it's also the opposite of what traditional movie making does in terms of building your climaxes up instead of down, and not making the stories top heavy. Even if you're making a Bond movie, which is a big influence on Lucas and Spielberg, who tend to do that. But, you just think of it in terms of Spy Who Loved Me. Yeah, okay, I've got the big thing right at the beginning, but I've got a great big effing explosion at the end as well. So it's not like it isn't the obvious thing to do, and they're deliberately not doing that because it's the inside. They're going to look at the inside because that's what you do with a difficult second album, and that's what this is, right? In a great way.
Yeah. I think you've probably that's a really good segue to the next bit, and that's structure. I find the structure of Empire Strikes Back very fascinating. One, from the minute it starts, the first 40 minutes, like to the dot, the first 40 minutes of this film really doesn't let up. It is pedal to the metal the whole time, and then it lets up for about 5 seconds to kind of give you a moment to breathe, and then it goes back to slamming it. But no, I found that also interesting, that the inverse of Star Wars, that we open up with Hoth. We have the big giant space battle takes place on Hoth. We have this big giant land battle that I love. The Hoth battle. That to me is one of my favorite Star Wars battles, if not my ultimate all-time favorite Star Wars battle. I love everything about that. The quiet before the storm, before the AT-ATs, and the chicken walkers start storming towards them. Once they take off and they're zooming around them and all, that is just such a great battle. But it is the big battle, but I like the fact that this starts really, really big, and then not just sort of personally do these spaces get small, but the story gets smaller, and it goes from big giant space battle to one-on-one personal battle. It goes from Rebels versus Empire to Luke versus Vader by the end, and it becomes a very deeply personal story in a way that Star Wars didn't achieve. There were personal aspects to it. There were personal components within Star Wars, but thematically and personally for all the characters, this becomes far more personal. I don't know. I love the structure of this film. I think that's probably that probably adds to why people are so fascinated and like this more, because it is so different than Star Wars. It is still Star Wars, but it is so different at the same time, and also so different to what you expect from your summer blockbusters as well.
I agree with all that. Yeah, I really like the structure as well. I think it's a great payoff from all the gung ho of the first film. That is continued in the first half, say, of this film. For it then to shift gear and start to become much more introspective. So that the final battle is, as you say, man on man. And I think in many ways, Vader is most terrifying in this for me. There are a couple of scenes where you see him where he's not really doing very much, but from all that sort of parading that he does in Star Wars, and at the start of this, his two most terrifying scenes for me, even now, are when he appears out of the sort of mist in Dagobah, in Luke's dream sort of thing. And he's just walking. I know it's all slowed down anyway, but he's walking very slow and imposing. And then when they meet, and he's standing on the carbonite thing, and Luke's literally looking up at him, and he's just a black silhouette, and then almost out of nowhere, this long red beam of threat appears. And he's very still even then. I think those are the two most terrifying Vader moments because they are so understated. And it's because the film is going into Luke's psyche that I find it terrifying. And I think it's sort of the adult heart and the more grown-up calm before the storm of back to old gung-ho excitement in the third one. So that is your payoff for having this much more pared down story here if you are the sort that just wants laser guns and spaceship battles. But the fact that this is a much more human story gives it a real power to me, and that's why I like Vader's stillness in this. And when he throws Luke in the thing and he just says all too easy, that is just shocking to me. And then Luke jumps out and he's very impressive. He says very impressive and all that business. And then when he just starts throwing stuff at Luke, throwing stuff at Luke, I will take that any day over what we get in Rogue One and things like that, as we said last week. I think Vader is much more of a presence here, and he's a terrifying presence, and that's all because the film has gone so introspective and small that he can afford to be, because he doesn't get lost in everything else that's going around him. So yeah, I agree with you, Luke. I think the structure of this, the reverse of Star Wars, is to this film's credit. Sergio.
Yeah, no, I'm certainly not going to disagree with any of that. I think what's intriguing as well is the way that, on the one hand, we get those sequences with Darth Vader, which when he's regularly killing off his generals, which was very funny. Partly for British audiences as well, because the first one he kills is actually the dreaded guy from Grange Hill.
Mr. Bronson.
So he knocks him off. Then he knocks off the guy from Secret Army, who was a Nazi in that one, Michael Culver, and knocks him off. Ken Colley survives. Survives into the third one, I think, and is brilliant character actor. So that's sort of hilarious. You've got knocking off all your generals, and that's they're starting to. And there's a scene where he falls out of camera shot, and he's kind of looking down on the floor and trying to concentrate on what Vader is saying. So oddly enough, it has a weird mixture, and yet somehow gets that tone right. And I think that's hard. And again, a lot of that is Kershner, because you're thinking it's in the writing, but it's also in the directing. It's a comedy shot, but you're playing it just right.
Yeah, and does he not say apology accepted?
Yes, on when Michael Culver does. Yeah,
which is a great
exactly.
one-liner.
Although that is very Bond villain type stuff, is it not?
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Stromberg would have said the same in Spider-Man or whatever, but absolutely, in a good way. So yes. I think that really works, and yet at the same time, he is menacing, partly because, and Kasdan's very good on this. He talks about the fact that, and this was in the context of him writing the Solo spin-off movie, that one of the things about the Star Wars saga, the initial 3 films, is, of course, that Luke Skywalker's your focal character. And this is the one that invests the most in him as the focal character. And yet the reality of it is, I think I would agree with that, is that as a viewer, Han Solo was the attractive, interesting character. I wanted to know more about the rogue. Yeah. And, and in that sense, it's always a slightly difficult situation. And it's not it's not anybody's fault, if you like. It's not because Hamill can't play the role or anything. It's not that. It's just that here, because we, that great thing that I did not understand in 1980, not properly, but I felt very deeply when he goes into it's got a name, isn't it? The dark forest, whatever it is, the dark cave. And obviously he, defeats Vader seemingly, but the head blows up and it's his face inside it, and there would be no space at all for anything even remotely like that in the first film. It's a gigantic leap to something very different, primal, troubling, psychologically very dense. And it's not that it's not all there, but theoretically, but that's not the tone. It's not what we're doing there. What you've got Obi-Wan as Gandalf the Grey passing away, and then he comes back as Gandalf the White, sort of thing. And you accept that because he's a father figure, but he actually isn't his father. But the scenes when his uncle and his aunt are killed off, again, it all happens off camera. It's important that, so it's sad for him, it's horrible, but you don't actually have to see it. Here, you're primed for it. You're primed for something devastating to happen. So, of course, you're leading towards that sequence, towards that part of the end of the film, which obviously is not only bigging up Luke's journey, but as you say, Matt, is also investing more in Vader, because, of course, on the one hand, he's been promoted. He hasn't got Peter Cushing to follow.
Yes,
that's right.
Although, of course, they introduce the Emperor, and depending which version, it's either Clive Ravel or Ian McDermott. They're both good in their own ways. But it's sort of fascinating to see how that changes as well, and that changes how you relate to it. So I think that kind of inversion of the traditional action narrative, let's call it, I think serves a different purpose, but it only works if you're making another one. Star Wars was not made that way, and so you couldn't do it that way. This one you could do that way because you promise that there is going to be another one. And the truth is that you're delaying, hopefully, the satisfaction of the big finish, because you're going to get that, but you're going to have to wait 3 whole years to view it. I mean, try explaining that to young people today. 3 years?
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, it's been it's been 3 years since the last season of House of the Dragon. So, we actually
you get no sympathy from me.
It was better back then. It was actually better back then. We didn't have to wait as long for as many stuff.
Not for the second movie, and then the third, But anyway, that's the thing. I think it's a possibility that's available to you in this narrow, dramatic series option that Lucas has taken. So it has this possibility for a rather devastating emotional effect. I think it all works splendidly.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the difference between going, like, the first film being very, very, very hero's journey, epic fantasy, to this being the like Freudian Jungian journey. Which is still that sort of the psychological hero's journey is kind of the reversal of these two, which I think is quite fun.
Yeah, and this is part of Luke's hero's journey, where he has to overcome the first real threat that he's faced. He's quite sort of sheltered in Star Wars by comparison, and this is one of the most difficult ones because it's all about him. It's about his own fears. And overcoming his own fears, the things that he doesn't yet understand, and then that is priming him to be the tougher, wiser, more experienced character that he is in the third film, when he has to really face the challenge. The challenge. This is like his sort of dress rehearsal, and he's gone in too quick. All that is very interesting stuff to me, in terms of character work. It's
the more character-driven of the three, which is for me why I probably am more drawn to it than the other.
Exactly.
Two.
Yeah.
Particularly this one.
Also, I think there are all kinds of great little grace notes. It's like, that sequence when in essentially the prologue to Act 1, when Han's gone out to find Luke, and they have to close the doors to the base because it's getting too cold. And that's a dramatic moment, and it's very, very slow, and it's all these kind of tracking shots on Leia. Even C-3PO is very sweet, and then Chewie, who sort of cries out because they've been locked out, and they're probably going to die of the cold. And scenes like that, or scenes when Yoda, Luke sort of says, I'm not frightened, and Yoda says, you will be, which is just a killer line, and it's fantastic. Line, But all those little beats, are just important because they are just character beats.
Yeah,
and that's great.
And it's building on what's gone before. So Han and Luke's relationship is advanced, which is what all good sequels should do. It's not the same thing. It's moved forward, because there's no way Han Solo would risk his life on an ice planet for Luke in the first film.
No.
So, no. But he does in this, because they've changed as people, and all that is good to see. That time has passed between the two films that we don't necessarily have to see as viewers, but it tells us that it has through the way that they interact with each other. All that is why this is a more impressive and rewarding film for me in this original trilogy.
This doesn't mean that I wouldn't have enjoyed a Star Wars 1.5 where I saw the first half of the film before it climaxed with Hoth, because I wanted to see that movie. I wanted it to end with that big climax, and then the next film started. But never mind. Only in my mind.
Let's pivot again and kind of focus on sort of like various key character moments throughout the film.
But how am I to know the good side from the bad?
You will know.
Why, you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder.
Who's scruffy looking?
You got a lot of guts coming here after what you pulled.
What is thy bidding, my master?
There is a great disturbance in the Force.
I'm, again, going back to sort of the concept of retcons and what will happen in the future. We've sort of touched upon this in sort of the writing phase, but I think, again, this film makes it very clear that there is still very much a love triangle between the three leads. I think Leia's worry, the expression of concern for Luke being stuck out, in the icy wilderness, is her conflicting emotions between which of these two guys do I like the most? What am I feeling in this moment? Because she seems it's a special kind of worry that is on that she is sort of juggling in this moment, which I think is kind of further revealed with deleted scenes. Once Luke is brought back, there is a scene very similar to the Han and Leia scene on the Falcon, where there is a near kiss with Luke and Leia when he's first brought back, and C-3PO comes in and interrupts them as they're going in for a proper romantic kiss. So again, it's like, how much did you really plan out, Luke or Lucas? I'm not sure you planned too much of it out. But also, I think the way in which, when Luke is hanging from the poles or whatever they're called at the bottom of Cloud City, him calling out to Leia, I'm sorry, I don't see that as a brotherly, sisterly connection. That was something, again, it's implying a very deep connection. It's implying a deeper psychological, mental connection that she's having with Luke versus, I would say, a steamy sexual connection that she's having with Solo, with Han. And again, it makes the triangle quite interesting. It's like she's getting this psychological thing, romance from Luke, while she's getting the the physical, the physical, almost kind of lustful romance from Han. And even when she tells Han, "I love you," well, what happens right after that? Well, she goes and when they find Luke, she kisses him again. It's a weird little kiss, but she kisses him when he's lying on that table. And it's like, it's not a kiss on the forehead, it's a kiss on the mouth. It's like, what, it's that conflict is subtle. It's subtle. It's subtly there, I think. And in some ways it's maybe not so subtle, but I think there was a more subtle conflict with Leia in terms of who she is really in love with in that film.
Let me just say that 11-year-old me completely disagrees with you on all this. It's far too disturbing, and I just don't want to go there in my head. So no, absolutely not. No, you know what though? I think this, let Matt actually chime in here. But just to say, no, I take your point, but that's also why they cut that scene, because I think it gives it the wrong balance. And it's interesting, but at the same time, she loves them both in different ways. I can live with.
Yeah,
I don't think she lusts for Luke, because actually,
she doesn't lust for Luke.
He's kind of a monk, isn't he?
No, if anything, I think she thinks.
But I still think she loves him, though. I think there's still a romantic.
That's okay.
Even with that scene cut, I think there is still a.
So do I. Conflict. So do I. And I think Luke is the man that would be, dote on her and be dependable, and Han would be the one that she would spend lonely nights thinking, "I wonder what he's doing." You know what I mean? And I think that.
Okay.
And I think that I don't know, Sergio. I was younger than you, but even when Jedi came out and we had that reveal, I do remember thinking, "What? Oh, come on, this isn't right." Because
for next week,
because I looked at her in Empire, and I had exactly what Luke was saying. Maybe I was depraved, I don't know, but I was thinking there was nothing sibling-ish about it. This was, she was kissing Luke to make Han jealous. I was all in for that, but there was nothing. There was nothing that said to me until that twist came in the third film that these two were related. Nothing.
I'm in touch with my 11-year-old on the inside, mate, and I'm just not buying it. No, I get it, but I think deep down, I know I'm sure they toyed with it clearly, and I think that there's evidence of slight indecision. I think perhaps. I think it's quite clear that was a mistake. I suspect that going back to the Leigh Brackett element, that was a stronger element when she was writing it, the idea of a love triangle, some kind, which normally you would resolve in those films with one of them dying. And there was always this idea that maybe Han Solo should die. But now, of course, he has a kind of semi-death in this one. He exits the narrative early, and all kind of frozen. He may or may not make it. But although I wouldn't, if I thought he wasn't going to make it the third one, I wouldn't have gone. No, imagine, but I think it's one of those things where there's that thing about making movies in the 70s, and that one of the great things about Star Wars as a film, and to a degree Empire Strikes Back, because it was all shot in the 70s, you're coming from an era of filmmaking that tended to be quite bleak and quite sour, and there are very few, unless they're made by Disney, and look at the Black Hole, there are very few films which tended to have a particularly positive vibe. It was just, that was from the 60s. In the 70s, it was a very bleak era. And it's interesting, that's why it stands out, because that's why most of the Star Wars knockoffs tend to be so rubbish, because they can't divorce themselves from that kind of weirdly dystopian view that they're kind of sucked into, and make these kind of bleak, depressing, or not especially fun films. Whereas what was interesting about the first Star Wars film, the one that got us hooked, and then we could, Lucas could do what he wanted with them, but what got us hooked was the fact that it was a swashbuckling adventure with characters you really liked, special effects you had never seen before and you were totally amazed by, and so there was visual splendor, there was humor, There was engagement with the action. There was fun with the characters. And you just suddenly realize there just weren't a lot of films like that.
Like I said, I'm fine with about 90% of the changes to Empire, but I think there is one change in Empire that is as egregious as the Greedo shooting first scene. And that is the changes that he makes to the original epic exchange between the Emperor and Vader. I love the original exchange. What is so interesting to me about Empire Strikes Back is trying to work out who knows what about who and when. So Vader from the get-go is Luke Skywalker is there. I want him. Okay, yeah. Is it because he blew up the Death Star? That's a really easy way of kind of explaining why he's so dogged about it. But as we will come to realize that the explanation has nothing to do with him blowing up the Death Star, but the reality of his parentage. When you get to this exchange, the original exchange is what is thy bidding, my master? And there's a disturbance of the Force. I felt it. We have a new enemy, Luke Skywalker. The Emperor's like, yeah, he could destroy us. He's just a boy. Vader said, he's just a kid. Don't worry about him. Vader's kind of defending Luke in this moment. No, don't worry about that kid. Don't worry, he's fine. Obi-Wan can't help him. Don't worry about it. And Emperor's like, no. The Force is strong with this guy. He cannot become a Jedi. The son of Skywalker cannot become a Jedi. And then Vader's like, okay, well, what if I turn him? The power play between Vader and the Emperor in this moment is very interesting. This dynamic is to me is very compelling, because on one end it's like, well, why does the Emperor say the son of Skywalker? Does the Emperor not know that Vader is Anakin? And what is going on here? Or is this or is this just a kind of a thing for the audience so they don't have to give away at that point in time that that is realistically probably what that is. But there is but in the phrasing of it, there shows an interesting disconnect. Is the Emperor saying it that way because at this point in time, Vader is Vader and Anakin is dead, metaphysically, in that kind of sense. Physically, Anakin is inside that suit, but the person who was Anakin is no longer there. So, and we know from Star Wars that Anakin was a powerful Jedi. So, but then you get these fucking changes that completely almost I don't want to say ruin the film, but it really does ruin the reveal, because it changes the dynamic of the reveal. And in the changes, it's,
what is thy bidding, my master?
There is a great disturbance in the Force.
I have felt it.
We have a new enemy. The young rebel who destroyed the Death Star. I have no doubt this boy is the offspring of Anakin Skywalker.
How is that possible?
Search your feelings, Lord Vader. You will know it to be true. He could destroy us.
He's just a boy. Obi-Wan can no longer help him.
The Force is strong with him. The son of Skywalker must not become a Jedi.
If he could be turned, he would become a powerful ally.
Yes, he would be a great asset. Can it be done?
He will join us or die, Master.
And Vader, how is that possible? All right, so now you've retconned this whole really interesting psychological scene to now be like, oh, so this is the moment that Vader finds out? So then why is he so obsessed with him at the beginning? Oh, it's just because of the Death Star, obviously. This is the Greedo shot first of Empire Strikes Back, and it fucking pisses me off that he's changed this. And this is a situation where it's like, stop fucking messing around with the way it was, because how you had it originally, that was perfect.
I'm not as pissed off as you, but I do agree with the fundamental point that to make Vader's desire for Luke to be that he blew up the Death Star is pretty weak, and it's not in fitting with the rest of the tone of the rest of the film. You know? So I do prefer the original. Well, I prefer the original version of all of them. That's just, you know, me. But I think it makes much more thematic and narrative sense in the original than it does in, you know what? Almost to the extent where I want to say, why does Vader care about the Death Star being blown up? Why does he care about that? You know, Tarkin might care about that. Peter Cushing might care about that.
Yeah.
But Vader's meant to be, the Jedi are meant to be on a higher plane than people like Peter Cushing.
Yeah.
You know what?
Vader didn't care about the Death Star in Star Wars.
That's right. So, in fact, he says, "Don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed." You know, you don't care about it. So why would that form why would that be the basis of an obsession for it?
Yeah,
I do agree with that. I think it's much stronger and much more viable in the original dialogue.
Yeah,
and of course, the prequel dialogue or the special edition dialogue is just much clunkier. You know, I have no doubt this is the son of Anakin Skywalker.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. This isn't special edition. This is during the filming of the prequels. So this is the problem. Lucas continues to change and change and change and change far after the special editions.
Well, the point remains to say that the dialogue is clunky, clunky as it comes.
Yes, it's classic.
So yeah, I mean, it won't keep me awake at nights, but I do agree with the fundamental point, and I definitely agree that it's better the first time around, the original version.
Yeah, I mean, I think that getting one understands, one has some sympathy with trying to keep the continuity going when things have inevitably monkeyed around with it. One gets that. I think that it worked better first time round. It doesn't have, when I rewatched it, I think what it does is it feels, as you say, a little bit clunky, a little exposition heavy. It's also not exactly contradictory, but it's having that problem of trying to hide the big reveal. And so therefore the truth is it can't square that circle. No. The earlier version, by being briefer and more succinct, makes it less of an issue, and therefore it feels smoother. So no, I agree. I didn't bump against it too much. I think you watch it and you end up feeling a little bit confused. I think potentially you're sort of thinking, because I thought, okay, moving on. And
I think my reaction is that you watch it and you just roll your eyes and say, well, that was better first time around.
Well, like so many things in life, guys, you know, what are you going to do?
You will go to the Dagobah system.
Dagobah system.
There you will learn from Yoda, the Jedi Master who instructed me.
Man.
Yoda. I want to talk a little bit about Yoda because he is what I'm calling the biggest retcon of Empire Strikes Back. And that is Lucas has this oh shit moment. I killed Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was meant to be the one to train Luke. Crap, what do I do? So in order to do that, he then obviously brings in he brings in Yoda, which adds all sorts of complications to the Star Wars mythos, and that is the Jedi Master who instructed me. Well, what the fuck happened to Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi? I guess he doesn't matter. Which it's one of those things like, if you have all the ingredients, just stick with what you've got. Just stick with what you got, because that's perfectly interesting. Perfectly interesting what you're doing with just that alone. You don't need to introduce Qui-Gon, and it's this weird idea of sort of, I guess trying to keep Yoda at this in this weird sort of saintly, position. Throughout the prequels, as we'll come to see. But even the whole kind of character of Yoda is sort of constantly being retconned back and forth over the years. Like why is he on Dagobah? What is Dagobah? Is it a Jedi training ground? Why is it so strong with the Force? Why is he there? Well, the prequels end up telling us that he's there, and then other Star Wars media tells us that he's the one who figures out how to summon the Force ghosts, and he's the one who summons Qui-Gon, and blah 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 blah. It's just sort of like, oh, all right, whatever. But even from the 80s, early 80s and 90s, the other, the general source material was that he goes to Dagobah, to be there because of after the fall of the Jedi, which I guess is fine. But I with Dagobah, I'm sort of quite fascinated by this planet and its Force sensitivity, and its what does that mean? I kind of don't like it as this is the planet that he goes to because the Jedi fell. I'm like, I think there's a more interesting explanation as to why he's on Dagobah. The whole cave aspect of Dagobah. I'm like, there's a more interesting story as to why we're there, I think, than potentially what we're potentially what we got. I don't know. Are you guys happy with the explanation for Dagobah that we eventually come to get, or do you think it has a more mystical purpose?
I tend to think, as so often is the case with the prequels, that the explanation given is pretty weak. It always seemed to me that this was where Yoda lived. This is where he was, almost, if he was, however he was born, he was here, and that's how he knows it so well. That's and that it is Force sensitive, and that he knows what's in that cave because he's had to go in it himself. That's how he knows what, you take in there what you take in there. And I think, to say that it's the idea of where he goes, because the Jedi have all fallen, I don't buy that. I think he's just there anyway, and I think that's just where he belongs. I don't know. What do you think, Sergio?
Well, I think it's very easy to square that one. It says, "As the Jedi fall and he goes home," and I think that works just fine. And I think that equally, I think you've got two different impulses from a storytelling standpoint. I think on the one hand, you've introduced the character and you say, well, that's where he is. That's where he is. And he's this, but clearly, the idea is that it's like an episode of Kung Fu, and basically you go see the master. So you go to him and you get trained and then you leave again, but he always stays there. That's kind of what he is. He's the kind of, he's the kind of mystic guy, it could be Remo, whatever it is, he's the kind of exotic person who understands martial arts and who can walk on water. I think that the way you fundamentally explain it in the later films, because I think the Fall of the Jedi is, I actually, maybe you should invite me to that episode. Maybe you shouldn't, because the podcast would never end. And I'm starting to feel very sorry for Matthew. But it seems to me that I always thought Revenge of the Sith is, I actually think it's a pretty decent movie. I actually quite like it. Certainly of the prequels, it's the strongest. Let's put it that way. And the Fall of the Jedi as represented in that, I think, is great. I think so. This idea that you go into hiding, and this idea that you go on a planet which is perhaps where you come from or where you used to spend all your time, because it's Force sensitive and it actually shields you so that you can't be found there, or that it's the kind of place where Darth wouldn't go because he couldn't survive there, because it would be inimical to people from the dark side or what have you, all these things. Like I say, the problem is the more you elaborate, the less interesting it becomes. And that's just true of storytelling. It's not just Star Wars, it's everything, right? It's kind of like, the minute you find out why, Rick and Ilsa broke up in Casablanca, it's okay, and it just about gets away. But the more detail that Rick would give us, the least interested we would become in that storyline. So it's the same here. So I think it works. I think he went home. He went into hiding and he went home. Let's leave it at that. And then we don't have to worry about it anymore. And I think that's good enough, because I think the power of those two ideas, the going home, the seeking refuge, the can you go home again? Or is home potentially a threatening place? Or is it that, no, like you say, because it has all these things that are important to the creatures like Yoda, or Grogu, where they come from, this is how they live. And it isn't great perhaps for other species, perhaps, you maintain the mystery about Yoda, because he's so old and so on, and he's been there forever. And it's like that line in Groundhog Day, maybe God isn't all-knowing, he's just been around longer than everybody else. And fundamentally he serves that purpose. And so I think it works. I think they both work, and they're both complementary ideas. So I never bump against them. I think those are just fine as they are, honestly. Never bugged me at the time, and it's not one of the things that I had the least problem with in terms of the prequel films.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I just find Yoda such an interesting sort of shit. What are we gonna do? But as a shit, what are we gonna do character? He's probably the single, not the single. He's one of two very, very good ideas that come out of this film. And I want to talk a little bit about that famous line.
And I'll return. I promise.
Told you I did. Reckless as he. Now, matters are worse.
That boy is our last hope.
No. There is another.
There is another. Now, interestingly, Lucas put that in there apparently as a signal to the audience that this could be a Game of Thrones before Game of Thrones situation where no one is safe. And if there's another, then that means Luke's life is possibly in jeopardy and that he could die and that no one is safe. Look, I don't think that line accomplishes that, though he does say this. He actually said this. This is from Lucas's mouth. But I like the implication of that, and I like the idea that could have been amplified, but it comes at a point in the movie where Han is already being tortured and frozen in carbonite, and Luke is coming in to save the day. There's not enough time left in the film you're not going to kill both of your heroes at the end of your movie. I don't think, unless you're going to let Leia become the hero in the end of in the third movie. But there is a part of me, it's kind of like, ooh, this is a good idea, Lucas, and I kind of wish you maybe took it that far. I'm not saying that I want Luke to die per se, but that level of threat, which I think we'll come on to in the third episode, when that becomes a bit more of a sticking point for certain actors and characters. I like the idea that there could be real jeopardy. I mean, no one expected Spock to fucking die in the Wrath of Khan, and then holy shit, Spock is dead for, a couple of days. But he's still dead, But I guess for you guys, when they utter this line, there is another, like we kind of discussed with the kind of the conversations between Obi-Wan and Luke about Anakin, and us viewing, or me viewing the story at that point is clearly Lucas saw Vader and Anakin as two different people. Yeah. Who is this? There is another. And you're in your head, you're in there watching Empire Strikes Back. You know nothing that's coming. In your head, what's the story that's going in your head?
Do you want to answer first, Sergio, or shall I?
All right, I'll get it out of the way. I just assumed that there was someone else who would be brought into the narrative. I think at that point, again, we've gotten used to approaching these kind of narratives in a different way, haven't we? So it'd be the idea that you'd assume something like that, but there it was more a kind of the idea that no, it's because there's going to be another film, and therefore it's just seeding stuff for the next movie. And that I was okay with that. It was something else to be discovered going forward. I was never that crazy about the Leia thing. I mean, it's not terrible or anything. The Twin Kids is a fun idea, and it actually is quite a nice idea in the prequels. But it was certainly not in my thinking. I don't know about you, Matthew. But,
no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I didn't sit there as a 6-7-year-old thinking, oh, that's going to be Leia. I sat there thinking, well, who's that going to be? I can't wait to find out in the next film.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who is it? It was a tease that you didn't know what to think about of it. But I never saw it coming that it would be Leia, and I have never bought into it. At the time I didn't buy into it. We'll talk about this when we do Jedi, but and I sort of also think I agree. You're not going to kill Luke off, so what's the point of this? I think it would have been more rewarding and better if the dialogue a bit between Obi-Wan's ghost and Yoda had not been that boy was our last hope. No, there's another, as it is, but have been that boy's our last hope. I know what we're going to do if he doesn't come back, sort of thing, and get it up that Luke may not survive it, and then what the third film is going to have to be something completely different. That I think it could have been built up better, and it could have been the foundations could have been laid better if that's what they wanted to suggest, that Luke might not come out of this alive. Rather than, because then there is another becomes a bit of a Deus Ex Machina for me, almost to the extent that you say, well, if there's another that can do what Luke's doing, who cares? Because almost by this point I'm thinking, well, Han's gone.
Well, this is
I'm ready to walk out, really.
Yeah. Well, also, I think what it also did was it made Yoda even more special, because his ability to see into the future and know things that nobody else knows. Even Obi-Wan from The Great Beyond seems to not actually. Now, of course, he does know, at least in terms of the retcon factor. We know he knows what he means, and it's a question of. So that's not relevant necessarily, but I thought also it just added extra things to the Yoda character, because of course it means Yoda gets the last line, and then we don't see him again. So that's kind of great, because I think that he's a strong character. And if you think about it, this idea that you've got, a Muppet character who they've actually made it work so successfly. Which is, I say that as a fan of Frank Oz and the Muppets in general. I watched the Muppet Show. I thought it was fantastic. But I think that they do great things with that character. You completely buy into it, and therefore I think it just adds to his strength. So from that point of view, I think it's the right beat. He has to say something vaguely mysterious, vaguely pointing to the future, and that we don't entirely understand, and it has to pay off. I'm not crazy about how it pays off, but it does pay off, and they did think it through, and I'm all for that.
Yeah. No, I'm not dogging the line. I think the line is a perfect teaser. It's the kind of teaser that you want towards the end of your film. Like that is, I love that line. I love that moment. There is another. What the fuck does that mean? Holy shit.
Yeah.
Who is this other? Who is this other? I want to know that. And that's the thing. That's kind of like we did last week. Like my brain goes into, okay, is there is there another Skywalker? He will go on to say that, but is that what that means? Is there another uncle? At this point in time, we think Uncle Owen is possibly they are Skywalkers. Is there some other branch of the family tree, or is there some other person like Yoda that is stationed out somewhere, hiding, one of these last remnants of Jedi? Hiding somewhere, which fucking hell. I mean, as we see in all these stupid Disney shows that happen post Jedi, there's like 1 million Jedi still out there hanging about, hiding about.
Yeah.
So, it's that's another kind of impossible, interesting. But also, where the fuck is Luke's mom?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not really averse to Luke having a sister he doesn't know about. I just don't want it to be who it turns out to be.
Yeah, well, that next week.
Next week. Yeah, next week. Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, if there's a relative he doesn't know about in whatever form it is that we don't know about, that's fine, no problem. But it's almost like when a killer is revealed in a whodunit, and it's the one person you didn't suspect because it's the one person who makes no logical sense.
Yeah,
the whole thing fails. So yeah, but as a teaser, that was my that was my feeling when I saw it, thinking, well, who? And more importantly, is Han coming back?
Well, yes, but I think I love the idea that, look, they've already been speculating this concept of Luke has a twin sister. I love the idea that part of Return of the Jedi is about Luke possibly finding his mother, who has another kid who is a couple of years younger than Luke now, right? And she's already force sensitive. She's already she's already there. She's why not?
Why not? Why not?
And then they team up to do what they need to do. She doesn't have to be Vader's kid. That doesn't have to be. But at the same time, she still could be. The twin thing still works, which we'll come to that next week. But yeah, so I love this line, but this is another one of those moments where the story that plays out in my head, I end up enjoying far more than I think what we eventually get.
Yeah, well, I think Sergio's right when he says the payoff is superb. The setup is superb. The payoff is a letdown.
Yeah,
I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah,
because as you say, Luke, what you imagine is far better.
Yes.
Would you join me for a little refreshment? Everyone's invited, of course. Having trouble with your droid?
No problem. Why?
Someone else we've not talked about, and I do feel like we should before we wrap up, is how fucking cool is Billy Dee Williams, Lando Calrissian?
yeah. He's a really welcome addition, I think, is Lando.
Of course, he is, of course, the one character who totally belongs to the 70s, but in a great way. I mean, come on. I want the thing from Shaft when he walks on.
He belongs to the 70s the same way Rick in Magnum P.I. still belongs to the 70s.
I know, and it's not just the moustache, is it? Yeah, I know. It's great because he's the only one with a moustache. No, but he's great. He is great. And again, it's actually quite fun to sort of, again, you've got a backstory there that's, but it's there, but you don't know quite what it is. And, in a way, he's a bit like Han Solo, and Han Solo is our favorite character anyway. And so it kind of makes sense. And, which is why I was looking forward to the Solo movie. But there you go. Yeah. It doesn't work, which is a shame, but it has bits of it that work. But no, he's fantastic. But also Billy Dee Williams, it's great. And he was, he was a reasonable name actor at the time, which is brilliant. He'd done a lot of those really interesting films. He was a great Scott Joplin in that biopic, for instance, and things like that. So no, terrific actor. So he's marvelous in it. It's great to spend time with him.
Yeah, he's one of those. He is obviously the new Han Solo. They're like, we need another rogue. Han Solo is becoming more heroic, less roguish. He's becoming more of the, more of a knightly figure. So they inject this dude into the film, and he is sort of what Han. I kind of speculated what Han could be. You couldn't fully trust Han Solo in the first movie. He had his selfish desires, he had his selfish impulses. He's got his motive and what he wants to do, and but ultimately he never actually like betrays anybody. And I think what I love about Lando is we meet him. There's this bit of tension, but then it's quickly fizzled out, and everything's, oh no, we're cool. And then the next thing you know, he throws them at the feet of the Empire, throws them at the feet of Darth Vader in that awesome scene in that long like dining hall. But then there's like instant conflict, and he's not as bad as what he comes across. They got there first. His arm has been twisted. He's trying to do the right thing in this situation, and but I guess what it also sets up, it's like, well, we might lose Han Solo, but
this is the thing. There was no guarantee Ford was coming back for number 3. And so the freezing in carbonite was a sort of Ford famously wanted Han Solo to die, and this is a sort of compromise. He can be in a sort of living death, and if he doesn't come back, that's where he is. And Lando is a great replacement. That's clearly what Lando is. At the sort of drafting stage, the sort of planning stages. It's clearly what Lando was partly there to do. If Ford said nah. But as we know, that doesn't happen. So Lando then becomes a character in his own right. But the fact that these two are so similar in many ways, you can see them as, friendly rivals as they're growing up. And, what you doing? Are you still hanging around with this old pirate? He says to Chewbacca, doesn't he? And
yes,
there's a history there that is done so well and so concisely, but is so believable because of the way they deliver those lines. And then you're absolutely right. I think that he's in an impossible situation, Lando, because what does he do? He's stuck between a rock and a hard place. And what does he do? He has to do the best he can in impossible circumstances. And that's what he says he's trying to do, is Chewbacca's strangling him. And 3PO's going, listen to him. Which is at odds with Solo saying to him, what's going on, pal? In that real sort of sneering, sarcastic way. I think Lando is a great addition to this world, and we see just enough of him for me to know that's how I feel about him. And again, sitting in the cinema seats in 1980, thinking, I hope this man returns in the next one.
Yes,
in whatever capacity they can get him in, because he's a real fine addition to the whole lore.
Oh, I find it absolutely hilarious. At the end of the movie, he's got his ship back, the Millennium Falcon, and he's wearing Han Solo's clothes.
Yeah, yes, he is.
He's wearing the shirt and the vest. He's ditched his 70s, waka clothes. He's like, here we go. I'm gonna take Han's clothes and I'm gonna go save Han. So again, you get to that ending, and you're just like, holy shit, like this is amazing. I can't wait to catch up with them on this adventure. To will they or will they not save Han?
How great would it have been if they got Pam Grier and it was Han Solo's ex-girlfriend? That would have been so cool.
That would have been
him and Leia. Come on,
fabulous.
But they were doing something else. So Lando's marvelous. So yes, we agree.
Join me, and I will complete your training. With our combined strength, we can end this destructive conflict and bring order to the galaxy.
I'll never join you!
If you only knew the power of the dark side. Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
He told me enough. He told me you killed him.
No. I am your father.
No. impossible!
Search your feelings. You know it to be true.
The big retcon, and that is the final confrontation between Luke and Vader. We were so bought, sold on this story that Obi-Wan fed Luke, oh well, this young pupil of mine, Darth Vader, well, he betrayed and murdered your father, oh, okay, all right, well, fuck that guy, and like as we talked about last week, that sets up this interesting possible revenge storyline. Does Luke want revenge for his father's murder? That's why he goes after Vader, who knows? But I tell you what was so fascinating about this is Lucas actually consulted with psychologists about this to sort of determine how people would react to this, how kids and viewers would react to this, and they basically said, look, there's one of two options. People are either going to accept it or they're going to be in denial. Which is exactly what happened. Both from reading the books, the novelization, and seeing the film, there was this reaction of people who either accepted it and people just no, this can't be the truth. They're going to change. This is going to be explained. This is going to be explained. This can't be the case. This can't. But this is where in terms of retcons, I am fully on board with this one. I think this is one of the most clearly one of the most iconic retcons in cinema history. But it complicates. I mean, there's that scene when Luke is, cradling his severed hand, and he's like, Ben, why did you tell me? Like there's a confused, angry tone to his voice when he's saying that. Not just because he's in pain, but I think because he's very pissed off. And I like this is sort of really caps this whole film off. How it goes. It starts off so big in this open, plain of snow and ice to this just moment of my whole world is just shattered.
Yeah.
Like Space Hitler is my dad. Holy fuck.
Yeah. The whole thing's been about, this intergalactic war. And now it's about a man or a boy and a cyborg.
Well, it's it becomes an internal war, doesn't it?
And it becomes an internal war. Yeah.
Everything
Luke has believed. This is what I love about it. Everything that Luke has believed up until that point, he now thinks is a lie. He's in total flux. The whole thing is in total disarray. The Rebel Alliance is all over the place. Luke's all over the place. Han's frozen all over the place. The whole thing is shattered. It's like the breaking of the Fellowship of the Ring. They're all over the place. And how are they going to come back together?
Yes.
As cliffhangers go, it's absolutely magnificent.
Yes.
And what I also like about it, and I've always liked about it, is you say people will be in denial, but the minute Vader says search your feelings, you know it to be true. And we know that the Force is all about you can sell things from your feelings. Luke's response to that is to go into meltdown and then say, Ben, why didn't you tell me? So it's true. You can deny it if you like, but search your own feelings because it's true.
Yeah.
And then the film goes off. It's brilliant stuff.
Yeah.
And I think for something that's so outrageous and so off the wall and such a surprise to then be absolutely confirmed by in one line and a follow-up performance that uses everything that has been set up before is pretty masterful. I reckon that's pretty masterful.
Yeah. I agree. I'm in love with how this film ends. There are a few that end so perfectly, and I think the Fellowship of the Ring is a really great example of kind of that very, very low moment, which is interesting because Fellowship of the Ring ends. That's the first, but this is the second. But this really feels like this is the first time with Lucas, it feels like this actually feels like the middle of a story. This is where I'm sort of like, you might have had kind of vague ideas of how you wanted this overall kind of story to go, because this does feel like the low point before your finale. And it is, look, Empire Strikes Back is, it has a couple little drawbacks. It has its retcon problems, but look, I would say Empire Strikes Back is a masterpiece, and am I going to say it's the best of all the Star Wars films we've ever had? I don't know. We'll wait till after Jedi to answer that question. But Sergio, any final thoughts?
Well, no, two things I was going to say. I do think that what's interesting here is that if you compare it with the revised edition of Blade Runner, which is to say the ending where you just get the doors closing. Imagine Empire Strikes Back just ends with him falling off. So literally it's the Sherlock Holmes at Reichenbach Falls. And you just see him go down. Fade to black. Right? Because if you think about it, that the way they get him out of that, the how do I get out of this, is incredibly weak. And it's very irritating. It's always bugged me. When I used to watch the film in the early 80s in Rome, we used to rent it on Super 8. And they couldn't quite make the whole film fit onto the reels. The Super 8 format was actually terrific. But the film is a little over 2 hours. It's actually now slightly longer in the kind of standard version that we now have. The original version, I think, is 2 hours 4. And they chopped about 3 or 4 minutes to get it to 2 hours, which is in terms of the lightsaber duel between Darth Vader and Luke. Because, again, it's very, very episodic. You go through a number of different stages of the fight. So it does tend to stop, start. And then, when he finally sort of says, I'd rather die, which is this extraordinary moment, but which then sort of turns into, how do I get out of this thing? Now, the way that works, as far as I'm concerned, it has to work, should work, but it's not presented that way, is that Luke is using his powers to find an escape route. But it's not presented that way. And so literally it's kind of like, it's like when that door suddenly, that trap door opens and he falls through the trap door and he ends up on that chute that, and then he's going to fall off the end. And makes no sense. Makes no sense at all. And it's really odd how they don't work a little harder to make that work. It's very strange. It could be Darth doing it, to call him by his first name. It could be Luke. You could do this in a number of ways. All you need is literally a few close-ups of hand gestures. So, you decide not to do that. So it's utterly arbitrary. It's very interesting because they probably ran out of time, ran out of money, blah, 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 all the obvious kind of relaxed reasons, or they felt because of the emotional punch of that moment, it doesn't matter. And I think that's the truth of it. So don't want to be too hard on it. But in actual fact, they had to build all those bits of sets. They had to have him shooting down. They have all of that. And yet, in actual fact, it tells you nothing. And it doesn't serve the story per se. It's just for him to escape and not die. And it's very peculiar. They've worked so hard on the rest of the film to not have that happen. And just when you could argue it matters the most, when it's the end of the effing movie, they do it. So in actual fact, if I have any serious criticism, it's always been that. It's undermotivated. It's not properly dramatized. And it's not presented in a way that suggests anything other than the purely functional necessity of getting him back onto the Millennium Falcon. And there's all kinds of ways to make that work. And like you say, you've got the telepathic connection, all good stuff, which you could argue, of course, is a clue to the fact that they're connected in some, genetic way, which is all good because that actually pays off. So I'm good with that, because, I don't want incest in my head. So, that's all good. But it's odd about that. But that's not I don't want to make a mountain out of a gaseous flying starship molehill. It seems to me that it's unnecessary thing to worry about it, but I know it bugged me at the time. So, I've had 46 years to think about it, and it's not gotten any better. But what the hey? It's fun, it's spectacular. But it's sort of that need to create another bit of jeopardy.
Yes.
Like, you know what? I didn't actually need it. He's hanging on and he's only got one arm. It suddenly turns into an Adolf Hitler joke, or the definition of agony, one arm man hanging off a cliff with an itchy bum, that sort of idea. It starts to feel a bit like that. And I'm just sort of thinking, you needed to spend an extra 10 minutes thinking this one through. But okay, well, you know what?
But I've never thought about that, but now you've mentioned it, I can that'll now start to bug me.
I'm really sorry, Matthew. All these years of not worrying about it.
It is meant to be that he's meant to literally be sucked into an air vent. That is what's meant to happen. That's what we're meant to be seeing. But I've always found it a clunky visual.
It's too convenient, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a very sort of, if we were seeing these air vents opening and shutting the whole time that he was fighting Vader or standing there, then you could maybe accept it a little bit more. But it does look like a convenient fall into a convenient tunnel. We'll be exploring all sorts of conveniences in part 3 of Star Wars: A Trilogy of Retcons when we get to Return of the Jedi.